Racist cop shoots Black Army sergeant. Minutes later, Pentagon Generals arrive with warrants. What if I told you that sometimes justice arrives faster than anyone expects? The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, where the smell of fresh coffee and apple pie usually meant comfort and home. But on this particular Tuesday, the air felt different, charged with something nobody could name yet. Inside, 34-year-old waitress Carmen Rodriguez wiped down tables with the same care she'd shown for 8 years, her movement steady despite the tremor in her hands. She'd seen many things working the lunch shift in this small Georgia town, but nothing prepared her for what was about to unfold right outside her window. The kind of moment that changes everything, not just for one person, but for an entire community. Sometimes the most ordinary days become the most extraordinary, and sometimes help comes from places you'd never expect. Where are you watching from today? Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams had been driving for 6 hours straight, eager to surprise his mother for her 70th birthday. The 28-year-old combat engineer had just completed a deployment in Germany and wanted nothing more than to see his family's faces light up when he walked through their front door. His dress uniform hung neatly in the back seat, pressed and ready for tomorrow's ceremony at the local VFW hall, where he'd be presenting a flag to another veteran's widow. The small town of Millbrook had been Marcus's home until he enlisted 10 years ago. Main Street still looked the same. Murphy's Diner with its red checkered curtains, Henderson's Hardware with the creaky front porch, and the old courthouse with its weathered stone steps. This was the America he'd sworn to protect, the place where neighbors knew each other's names and helped during hard times. Carmen noticed a young black man in the military vehicle as he pulled into the diner's parking lot. Something about his posture, straight-backed, purposeful, reminded her of her own son who'd served in the Navy. She watched him check his phone, probably calling his family to say he'd arrived safely. That's when she saw Officer Derek Paulson's patrol car turn into the lot. Paulson had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 15 years, though his record told a troubling story that few people knew. 3 excessive force complaints in the past 2 years, all dismissed by his supervisor. A pattern of targeting young black men during traffic stops. A reputation among certain circles for what he called keeping the peace, though peace for whom was never quite clear. Marcus stepped out of his vehicle, stretching after the long drive. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a simple polo shirt, but carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd served his country. He was reaching for his wallet to check if he had enough cash for lunch when he heard the sharp command, "Stop right there. Put your hands where I can see them." The words cut through the afternoon, quiet like a blade. Marcus froze, his training kicking in immediately. He'd been in actual combat zones where the rules of engagement were clear, where respect was earned through service and sacrifice. This felt different, dangerous in a way he couldn't quite process. "Sir, is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and respectful. His hands remained visible, open and steady. "I said stop talking and put your hands up." Paulson's voice carried the edge of someone looking for a confrontation, rather than trying to defuse it. His hand moved his weapon. Carmen's heart began to race. She'd seen Paulson in action before, always aggressive, always seeming to escalate rather than calm situations. She moved closer to the window, her phone already in her hand. Something told her this wasn't going to end well. Other diners began to notice the commotion. Old Tom Fletcher, a World War II veteran who ate lunch at Murphy's every Tuesday, stood up from his corner booth. Sarah McKenzie, who taught 3rd grade at the elementary school, stopped mid-conversation with her friend. The entire restaurant went quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. "Officer, I'm Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, United States Army," Marcus said, his voice still controlled despite the situation escalating beyond any reasonable bounds. "I'm just trying to get lunch before visiting my family." But Paulson wasn't listening. In his mind, he saw what he wanted to see, a young black man who needed to be put in his place. The uniform hanging in the back seat, the military plates, the respectful demeanor, none of it registered. Years of prejudice had clouded his judgment so completely that he couldn't see past his own hatred. "I don't care who you think you are," Paulson snarled, drawing his weapon. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for. The lie hung in the air like poison. There had been no call, no description, no crime. Just a police officer who'd let his worst instincts take control. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. He'd faced enemy fire overseas, had been in situations where split-second decisions meant life or death. But this was different. This was his own country, his own community, and he was being treated like an enemy by someone who'd sworn the same oath to protect and serve. Carmen couldn't stay silent anymore. She stepped outside, her voice shaking but determined. "Officer Paulson, this young man hasn't done anything wrong. He just arrived. I saw the whole thing. Get back inside, ma'am. This is police business." But Carmen stayed put. 8 years of serving this community had taught her when to speak up. Her grandmother had faced worse than this during the civil rights era, had taught her that silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of crime. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Marcus remained perfectly still, his military training warring with his growing anger. He thought of his mother, probably setting the table for a birthday dinner she'd been planning for weeks. He thought of the flag presentation ceremony tomorrow, of the widow who would receive it with tears of gratitude for her husband's service. Then Paulson's finger moved toward the trigger, and time seemed to slow. In that moment, Marcus realized that all his service, all his sacrifice, all his dedication protecting American values meant nothing to a man pointing a gun at his chest. The America he'd fought for overseas felt very far away from the America he was facing right now. The shot rang out across the quiet parking lot like thunder, shattering the afternoon peace and sending shockwaves through everyone who witnessed it. Marcus felt the burning pain tear through his shoulder, spinning him around as he fell to the asphalt. The taste of blood filled his mouth and his vision blurred, but his military training kept him conscious and alert. Carmen screamed, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. Inside the diner, chairs scraped against the floor as patrons rushed to the windows. Tom Fletcher, his old eyes sharp with military recognition, immediately began barking orders. "Call 911. Get towels. Somebody help that soldier." Paulson stood over Marcus, his weapon still drawn, adrenaline and panic beginning to replace his initial surge of authority. He was reaching for something. He shouted to no one in particular, already crafting his story. I saw him reach into his vehicle. But Carmen had seen everything. Her phone had been recording since the confrontation began, capturing every word, every gesture, every second of the unjustified shooting. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside Marcus, pressing a clean dish rag against his wound while calling for an ambulance. "You're going to be okay," she whispered to him. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." Marcus looked up at the stranger who was risking herself to help him and managed a weak smile. "Thank you," he whispered. Even wounded and bleeding, his first instinct was gratitude rather than anger. Within minutes, the scene transformed. The ambulance arrived first, paramedics working quickly to stabilize Marcus, while Paulson stood to the side, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what he'd done. The story he'd planned to tell, armed suspect, reached for weapon, feared for his life, began to crumble as witnesses came forward. Sarah Mackenzie approached one of the arriving officers with quiet determination. "I saw the whole thing. That police officer shot an unarmed man who was just trying to get lunch. The young man never threatened anyone, never reached for anything." Tom Fletcher, his voice carrying the authority of 8 decades and a Bronze Star, spoke with a commanding presence he'd once used on Pacific beaches. "Son, I've been in combat. I know the difference between a threat and an execution. What I just witnessed was attempted murder. More witnesses emerged from the diner, from the hardware store, from the small shops along Main Street. Each account was the same. An unarmed soldier, respectful and calm, shot without provocation by an officer who'd lost all sense of duty and honor. As Marcus was loaded into the ambulance, his blood staining the white sheets, Carmen clutched her phone with its damning video evidence. She'd grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about injustices that went unpunished, about witnesses who stayed silent, about communities that looked away. Not today. Not on her watch. The ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, carrying Marcus toward Millbrook General Hospital. Carmen climbed into her car to follow, but not before she did something that would change everything. She uploaded the video to social media with a simple caption: "This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams. He served our country overseas. Today, he was shot while trying to buy lunch in his hometown. This needs to stop." What Carmen didn't know was that Marcus's unit had been tracking his progress home through their informal network. When he failed to check in with his squad leader as planned, Sergeant Major Patricia, Hayes began making calls. Within an hour of the shooting, she connected with Marcus's mother, learned about the incident, and initiated a chain of communication that reached all the way to the Pentagon. Meanwhile, at Millbrook General Hospital, Dr. Jennifer Park worked carefully to repair the damage to Marcus's shoulder. The bullet had missed major arteries, but the psychological wounds would take longer to heal. As she operated, she thought about her own son, who'd be Marcus's age, and wondered how many other young soldiers had faced similar treatment after serving their country with honor. In the waiting room, Marcus's mother, Dorothy Williams, sat in stunned silence. She'd raised her son to respect authority, to serve his community, to believe in the promise of America. Now she struggled to reconcile those teachings with the reality of what had happened to her boy. Carmen sat beside her, still clutching the phone that contained the evidence of her son's shooting. "He was so polite," Carmen said softly. "Even with a gun pointed at him, even when he was shot, he stayed respectful. You raised a good man, Mrs. Williams." Dorothy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He always said the military taught him that real strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves. I never thought he'd need protection from his own community." Outside the hospital, news vans were already arriving. Carmen's video had gone viral, shared thousands of times in just a few hours. The hashtag Justice for Marcus began trending, and journalists from Atlanta and beyond were making the drive to Millbrook. What had started as a local incident was becoming a national story. But something else was happening too, something that neither Paulson nor his department had anticipated. In Washington, D.C., phones were ringing in offices with more authority than any small-town police department could imagine. The Pentagon takes care of its own, and Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, wounded in the line of duty, deployed multiple times in service of his country, was about to discover just how far that protection extended. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. 3 hours after the shooting, as Dr. Park finished surgery and declared Marcus stable, something unprecedented was happening in the corridors of military power. General Patricia Morrison, a 2-star general and director of military personnel policy, had been in a routine budget meeting when her aide handed her a tablet showing Carmen's viral video. The general's face hardened as she watched the footage. She'd spent 30 years in the Army, working her way up through ranks where every promotion had been earned twice over. She'd seen young soldiers face enemy fire with courage, watched them sacrifice for their brothers and sisters in arms, witnessed the incredible dedication of those who chose to serve. What she was watching now was a betrayal of everything the uniform represented. "Get me the base commander at Fort Stewart," she said quietly, "and contact the FBI Civil Rights Division. Now." Meanwhile, in Millbrook, Police Chief Robert Hayes, no relation to Sergeant Major Hayes, was experiencing his own crisis. Paulson sat in the interview room, still in his stained uniform, trying to maintain his story despite mounting evidence against him. The dashboard camera from his patrol car had malfunctioned, conveniently, he claimed. But Carmen's video told a different story, one that was being broadcast across every major news network. "Derek, what were you thinking?" Chief Hayes asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. He'd known Paulson for years, had promoted him despite the complaints, had given him chances that now seemed tragically misguided. This young man is a decorated soldier. He hadn't committed any crime. Paulson's bravado was beginning to crack. "I thought he was reaching for something." In the heat of the moment, you don't have time to think. You react. But even as he said it, both men knew it was a lie. The video showed Marcus's hands clearly visible throughout the encounter, showed his respectful demeanor, showed Paulson's aggressive escalation of a situation that should never have occurred. At the hospital, Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, his mother holding his hand while Carmen maintained her vigil nearby. Word had spread throughout the black community, and the waiting room filled with faces Marcus didn't recognize. People who simply felt called to show support for a young man who'd served his country and been shot for the color of his skin. Reverend Samuel Johnson from Macedonia Baptist Church arrived with his wife, carrying flowers and a thermos of coffee for Dorothy. "We don't know your son personally," he said gently, "but we know his heart. Any young man who served his country deserves better than what happened today." The support was overwhelming and deeply moving, but it couldn't erase the fundamental injustice of what had occurred. Marcus had been shot not because of anything he'd done, but because of who he was, a black man in a small southern town, encountered by a police officer whose prejudices had overridden his duty. As evening fell, something extraordinary happened. A convoy of black SUVs pulled into the hospital parking lot, followed by military vehicles bearing Pentagon plates. General Morrison had flown down from Washington, accompanied by military investigators and FBI agents. The message was clear. When you attack a soldier, you attack the entire United States military. Dorothy Williams looked up from her son's bedside as a two-star general walked into the room, followed by officers whose uniforms bore decorations from conflicts around the world. She'd never seen such high-ranking military personnel outside of television, yet here they were, coming to check on her wounded son. "Mrs. Williams," General Morrison said, her voice gentle but carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm General Morrison from the Pentagon. Your son is a credit to his uniform and his country. We're here to ensure he receives the justice he deserves." The general moved to Marcus's bedside, where he was finally awake, his shoulder heavily bandaged but his eyes clear. "Sergeant Williams," she said formally, then added more softly, "How are you holding up, soldier?" Marcus struggled to sit up, his military bearing intact despite his pain. "I'm okay, ma'am. Just confused about why this happened." "I'm not confused at all," the general replied firmly. "What happened to you was wrong, and it's going to be made right. You have the full support of the United States Army behind you." What Marcus didn't know was that General Morrison had already met with FBI agents, had reviewed Carmen's video evidence, and had authorized a full military investigation into civil rights violations. The Pentagon had also reached out to the Justice Department, ensuring that this case would receive federal attention far beyond anything the local police department could handle or influence. In the police station, Chief Hayes was receiving phone calls that made his hands shake. The FBI was opening an investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was sending agents. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division was reviewing the case. What had started as a local incident was now a federal matter with implications that reached the highest levels of government. Paulson, meanwhile, was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Shooting an unarmed civilian was bad enough, but shooting a decorated soldier had triggered protocols and protections he'd never imagined. The military doesn't abandon its own, and Marcus Williams, combat veteran, decorated sergeant, faithful son, was about to discover just how powerful that protection could be. Carmen, still clutching her phone with its precious video evidence, felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Her recording had sparked a movement, had brought justice rushing toward Millbrook faster than anyone could have predicted. But it couldn't undo the trauma Marcus had experienced, couldn't erase the fact that a soldier had been shot while simply trying to come home. Have you ever faced something like this? Share your experience in the comments. Within 24 hours of the shooting, Millbrook found itself at the center of a federal investigation unlike anything the small town had ever experienced. FBI agents worked alongside military investigators, conducting interviews, gathering evidence, and building a case that would ultimately reshape how the community thought about justice and accountability. Officer Derek Paulson was arrested at his home early Thursday morning, charged with attempted murder, violation of civil rights under color of law, and deprivation of rights under federal statute. The charges carried potential sentences that made his lawyers' face go pale during their first meeting. This wasn't going to be handled quietly in local court. This was federal, serious, and career-ending at minimum. General Morrison had established a temporary command post at the hospital, ensuring that Marcus received the best possible care while also coordinating the military's response. She understood that this case represented something larger than one shooting. It was about the contract between those who serve and the country they protect. Sergeant Williams, she said during one of her visits to his bedside. "I want you to know that your service has been exemplary. 3 deployments, commendations for courage under fire, leadership that your fellow soldiers respect. What happened to you doesn't change any of that. If anything, it reinforces why your service matters." Marcus nodded, though the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional trauma of being shot by someone sworn to protect and serve. "Ma'am, I keep thinking about all the other soldiers who might face something like this. What happens to them if they don't have cameras recording, if they don't have the Pentagon showing up?" It was a profound question that cut to the heart of systemic issues far beyond one officer's actions. General Morrison had been thinking about the same thing. That's exactly why this case matters so much. Every victory for justice makes the next one more likely. Carmen had become a reluctant celebrity, her video viewed millions of times and her phone ringing constantly with interview requests. But she found herself most moved by the quiet conversations with other witnesses who had found their courage through her example. Tom Fletcher had given a detailed statement to FBI agents, his testimony carrying the weight of 8 decades of life experience. Sarah Mackenzie had organized her fellow teachers to write letters supporting Marcus and calling for police reform. The investigation revealed troubling patterns in the Millbrook Police Department that went far beyond Paulson's individual actions. Internal affairs complaints that had been dismissed without proper investigation, training programs that emphasized force over de-escalation, a culture that had allowed bias to flourish unchecked for years. Chief Hayes, faced with federal scrutiny, made the difficult decision to cooperate fully with investigators. "I should have done more," he admitted to FBI agents during his interview. "I saw the complaints. I knew there were problems, but I told myself they were isolated incidents. I failed this community, and I failed Sergeant Williams." The federal investigation also brought unexpected allies to Marcus's cause. Veterans organizations from across Georgia converge on Millbrook, not to protest or create disturbances, but to show solidarity with a fellow soldier who had been wronged. The VFW, American Legion, and Vietnam Veterans of America issued joint statements condemning the shooting and calling for systemic reform. Perhaps most significantly, other victims of police misconduct began coming forward. Emboldened by the federal attention and the support shown to Marcus, families who had suffered similar injustices found their voices. Carmen's video had not only documented one crime, it opened a window into patterns of abuse that had been hidden for too long. Dr. Park, who had saved Marcus's life in the operating room, found herself deeply affected by the case. She began researching trauma care for victims of police violence, ultimately establishing a support group for survivors and their families. "Healing isn't just about repairing physical damage," she explained to Dorothy Williams. "It's about restoring dignity and hope." The media attention also brought unwelcome scrutiny to Marcus's personal life, with reporters digging into his background, looking for any detail that might complicate the narrative. What they found instead was a young man whose entire life reflected service and sacrifice. Teachers who remembered his respectful demeanor in high school. Military colleagues who described his leadership and courage under fire. Community members who recalled his volunteer work during home visits. As Marcus gradually recovered, gaining strength and beginning physical therapy, he made a decision that surprised many people. Instead of focusing solely on his own case, he began reaching out to other victims of police misconduct, offering support and sharing his platform to amplify their stories. "I've been blessed with support from the Pentagon, from the community, from people all over the country," he told Carmen during one of her visits. "A lot of people don't have that kind of backup. If my situation can help others get justice too, then maybe something good can come from this nightmare." The legal proceedings moved forward with unusual speed for federal court. Paulson's lawyers attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the federal prosecutors were determined to send a clear message. Video evidence, witness testimony, expert analysis of police procedures. Every element pointed toward a conviction that would result in significant prison time. Meanwhile, the Pentagon implemented new protocols for supporting military personnel who become victims of civilian crimes. The Marcus Williams case had revealed gaps in the system that left soldiers vulnerable after their service, and General Morrison was determined to ensure that no future veteran would face such challenges without institutional support. The changes extended beyond individual support to systemic reform. The FBI's investigation led to a consent decree requiring the Millbrook Police Department to undergo complete restructuring, with federal oversight of training, procedures, and accountability measures. If you've been moved by this journey, subscribe for more heartfelt stories. 6 months after that terrible Tuesday afternoon, Marcus Williams stood in the courthouse wearing his dress blue uniform, his shoulder fully healed, and his bearing once again reflecting the pride and dignity that had been temporarily shaken but never broken. Derek Paulson had been convicted on all federal charges and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. But more importantly, the case had sparked changes that would protect others from similar injustices. The consent decree with the Millbrook Police Department had resulted in the most comprehensive police reform in Georgia's history. New training programs emphasized de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. An independent civilian review board was established with real authority to investigate complaints and impose discipline. Chief Hayes had retired, replaced by a reform-minded leader with experience in community policing. Carmen Rodriguez had used her newfound platform to establish the Witness Foundation, providing support and legal resources for people who document police misconduct. Her grandmother's teachings about speaking up in the face of injustice had blossomed into a movement that helped dozens of families find their voices and seek accountability. "I never expected to become an activist," she told Marcus during the foundation's first fundraising dinner. "I was just a waitress who couldn't stay quiet when something wrong was happening right in front of me." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Marcus replied. "One person with the courage to act when action is needed." The relationship between Marcus and his hometown had transformed as well. What began as a traumatic homecoming had evolved into a deeper understanding between the community and one of its sons. The very people who had witnessed his shooting became advocates for justice and reform. Murphy's Diner now displayed a small plaque dedicating a booth to all who serve with honor, and Carmen made sure Marcus's coffee was always fresh whenever he visited. General Morrison had been promoted to 3 stars, partly in recognition of her handling of the Marcus Williams case and the broader military personnel protection protocols she'd implemented. During the promotion ceremony at the Pentagon, she kept a photo of Marcus in his hospital bed on her desk, a reminder of why military advocacy mattered beyond bureaucratic procedures. "Every soldier who serves overseas trusts that America will be there for them when they come home," she said in her acceptance speech. The Marcus Williams case reminded us that this trust is sacred, and protecting it requires constant vigilance. Dr. Park's Trauma Support Group had grown into a regional network, providing counseling and medical care for police violence survivors. Her research on trauma recovery had been published in medical journals, contributing to better treatment protocols nationwide. The healing she provided went far beyond surgical repairs. It offered restoration of dignity and hope. Tom Fletcher, the World War II veteran whose testimony had been crucial in the federal case, passed away peacefully 4 months after the trial. At his funeral, Marcus served as one of the pallbearers, carrying the flag that would be presented to Tom's widow. In his eulogy, Marcus described Tom as a soldier who never stopped serving, whose courage in speaking truth proved that heroism has no expiration date. The ripple effects of that Tuesday afternoon continued spreading. The Justice Department used the Millbrook case as a model for federal intervention in police misconduct cases nationwide. Veterans organizations established rapid response protocols for supporting service members who face civilian persecution. The FBI created specialized units for investigating crimes against military personnel. Perhaps most significantly, the case had changed how America thought about the relationship between those who serve and the communities they protect. Marcus's shooting had revealed uncomfortable truths about racism and police violence, but the response, swift federal action, community support, and systemic reform demonstrated that change was possible when people chose courage over comfort. On the first anniversary of the shooting, Marcus returned to Murphy's Diner, this time in civilian clothes, but still carried himself with military bearing. Carmen served him the same lunch he'd been trying to order that terrible day, a hamburger with fries and sweet tea. The taste was everything he'd remembered from childhood, made sweeter by the knowledge that justice had been served. Do you ever regret pressing record on your phone that day? Marcus asked Carmen as she refilled his tea glass. Carmen thought for a moment, looking out the window at the parking spot where Marcus had fallen bleeding onto the asphalt. I regret that it was necessary, she said finally, but I'll never regret doing what was right. After lunch, Marcus drove to the cemetery where Tom Fletcher was buried. He placed a small American flag by the headstone and stood in respectful silence for a few minutes. The old veteran's courage in speaking truth had been just as important as any battlefield heroism, maybe more so, because it had required standing up to authority in his own community. As he prepared to leave Millbrook again, Marcus reflected on how the shooting had changed him. The naive trust in institutions had been replaced by a more mature understanding of how justice actually works. Not automatically, but through the persistent efforts of people who refused to accept wrongdoing. His faith in America hadn't been destroyed. It had been refined, tested, and ultimately strengthened by the discovery that when good people act with courage, the system can still work. The key to his mother's house felt different in his hand now as he unlocked the front door. It wasn't just a symbol of homecoming anymore. It was a reminder that home is something you have to fight to protect, and that the fight is worth it when it's grounded in dignity, truth, and a belief that every person deserves to be treated with respect. Dorothy Williams hugged her son tightly, knowing that he'd been wounded, but also that he'd been healed by something larger than medical care. He'd been embraced by a community that chose justice over convenience, supported by institutions that remember their highest purposes, and strengthened by the knowledge that his service mattered not just on foreign battlefields, but in the ongoing struggle to make America live up to its founding promises. The story that began with a shot fired and hatred ended with a community transformed by the choice to pursue justice with dignity, proving that even in our darkest moments, hope and healing remain possible when good people refuse to stay silent. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that matter.